On behalf of the Rodel Foundation, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to add our welcome. We are honored to be your hosts for this event. And as our invitation said, no more blah, blah, blah. This is intended to be a different kind of effort. We want you all to leave here with a different view and a different aspiration and a different intention than you came into the room with. If I could, a couple of introductory thoughts to launch this morning. The Rodel Foundations were established 13 years ago in the states of Delaware and Arizona with a simple intention. We wanted to lead an investment effort to accompany and to support existing policies and existing efforts in the states of Delaware and Arizona so that by 2020, both of those states would go from the middle of the second tier to among the very best public education systems in the United States. I want to share very briefly a couple things we think we've learned along the way. First of all, when you look at the data and you look at the results of all the investments that we've all made, and everybody in this room is a significant stakeholder in Arizona's public education system, so you know about what I'm to say. There are perhaps 8 things that high-performance systems all share. Number 1, great teachers, and lots of them. A great teacher in every classroom for every kid is essential. Secondly, high expectations of everybody, of students, of teachers, of principals, of superintendents, administrators, parents, everybody. Third, the availability of all-day kindergarten in our poverty schools to join those of us who are more prosperous in this extremely important early learning tool. Next, smaller classroom size, K through 3. Evidence is overwhelming. Key place to invest. Help for struggling students, adequate funding, and the involvement of parents and competition to make the system stronger. These 8 things we know. These 8 things we invest in. A fair question is, despite the progress that's been made, and it's been substantial, despite the effort of so many organizations, people, and the fact that we have excellent teachers in many places, really good schools in lots of places, good school districts, and 2 of the very best charter school systems in the United States. The number 1 and the number 5 rated high schools in the United States are in Arizona. So there's a lot to be proud of. What we haven't done is we haven't moved the needle impressively. Why? We want to talk about that today. And in my view, there's a couple things. Number 1, no private sector enterprise, no matter how resourced, no matter how aspirational, no matter how committed, no matter how hardworking, can by itself, even with generous partners, move the needle. And the data would suggest no public sector, with the exception of possibly 4 states, has by itself moved the needle. So what does it take? What's missing, the presence of which would make a difference? And that missing, in our view, is this: a honest-to-goodness, real legitimate public-private partnership effort. Why doesn't that exist? Good question. What's happened is we are kind of in a funk. To have cooperation, you have to have compromise. And for some reason, we think that compromise is some sort of weakness, some sort of cop-out. And I like to make the case it's just the opposite. If you think about the finest document ever created by human beings on the planet, was the Constitution of the United States of America. It is the essence of a compromise. You had fiercely independent people fighting for federal control, who didn't want states to have the ability to opt out if they didn't like how things were going. You had states' rights advocate, fearful, disrespectful in some cases, very concerned about the power of the federal government. They fought each other. And both of those were very suspicious of the judicial system and didn't want them to have control. From those 3 competing views, we crafted an alloy. And an alloy is the essence of the strongest possible end result. It is greater and it is stronger and more powerful than any of the elements that went to make it. If you still think that compromising is a weakness, I have an exercise. I'd like you to head home tonight, say to your spouse or your loved one, honey, I've had a revelation. My ideas are right, yours are wrong. I'm going to stand on the principle of no compromise. Then give us a call tomorrow and tell us how your evening went. What we want to do now is have a conversation at the tables. This is a little different than the typical experience. We want what you want to talk about. We want to have your ideas heard and then vetted by this group of experts, the panel who are going to assemble in a few minutes behind me. And they will address what you want them to talk about, rather than the other way around. We have the leaders of the state's educational policy and its mechanisms, starting with Superintendent Huppenthal, and through a wide variety of experts who are responsible for our system. So work hard, enjoy, and in an hour and 45 minutes, we'll have you out of here. Thank you.
And good morning, everyone, and welcome to what we hope will be an encouraging, a thought-provoking, and enlightening conversation based on your conversations that you've been having at your tables. We have your questions. We're going to try to get to as many of those questions as we can. My name is Ted Simons. I'm the host of Arizona Horizon. Good to see so many familiar faces. I feel like that's a guest list for Horizon out there in this audience right now. Good to see so many faces and so many folks that are interested in this very, very important topic. So I want to get things started as soon as we can. No time to fool around here. Let's introduce our panelists, and we'll get to the questions right after that. Starting with my immediate left, Mary Kerner is the Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at ASU, and Andrew Morrill is President of the Arizona Education Association, and John Huppenthal, Superintendent of Public Instruction. To my immediate right, Jonathan Butcher, Education Director of the Goldwater Institute, Jaime Molera, Member and former President of the Arizona State Board of Education, and Dana Wolf-Neymark, President and CEO of Children's Action Alliance. This is our panel of experts. Here are your questions. We're going to get things going right off the bat with kind of an overview, and Superintendent Huppenthal, will start with you. Basically, what is the goal? What is the bottom line goal? How do we prepare all students to graduate high school ready and prepared for post-secondary education, a certificate, college, career? Basically, what are we doing here?
Well, I think the bottom line goal is to create an education system that creates an environment in which students maximize the opportunities that they have in life, that they develop the emotional strength, that they develop the social strength, that they develop the cognitive skills, so that every door in life is open to them. Be that going on to a four-year university at a prestigious university, be it a local university, be it the armed forces, be it a technical career. So for me, education is all about opening every possible door for every child. And that is the key to the system. And it's not only cognitive growth, but we know more and more that it's about emotional strength. The data is just becoming overwhelmingly that we have to focus more on how these students are growing emotionally, their grit, their determination, their confidence. All of these are huge predictors of success in life. So it's a balanced system that really provides a multidimensional education for students. It's an education that's not too narrowly focused.
Dana, what do you think the goal is?
I agree with the superintendent. I think that's a great vision for our education system. We want all kids to live up to their potential and be able to reach their dreams. Don talked about 8 features of a strong system, and I have a shorter attention span, so I have 3 features, 3 things that I think we can do together. 1 is match funding with expectations. 2 is prepare and reward and support teachers to do their job well. And 3 is to design public policies so that children are healthy and ready to learn. And unfortunately, we've been going the opposite direction in all those 3 for a while. So I think we can reverse that and work together to turn that around.
Mary, we're talking about all students here. What is the goal? How do you prepare all students for success later in life?
Well, from my point of view, of course, it's about teachers. There is every bit of research that shows the most important person in any of you who've been to school or have children in school know that the central important people are teachers. And recruiting, keeping, retaining good teachers is your responsibility. How many people here would recommend their child become a teacher and stay a teacher, starting at $30,000 a year? How many people here would say, no matter what college, no matter how elite, no matter how common, perhaps, like ASU, extraordinary, would actually, no matter what, the end result is you giving back to the children in that classroom and to your country. Being a teacher is one of the most patriotic acts that anybody can do. And this is a system. This is not me alone preparing teachers. It is a system that the legislature, here, everyone in this audience, influenced, people who are in influence, and parents have got to get the right people in classrooms and make them stay.
Jonathan, how do you respond to that? The best way to, let's move to the teacher element here. How best do you incent good teachers? What is a good teacher?
Well, a good teacher can be defined by how well they motivate their students to learn, not just in the classroom, but for the rest of their life. I think in the larger picture of what we have before us in education in Arizona and across the United States is we can take the example from Apple computers. They made, with iTunes, the ability to buy an individual song. You don't have to buy a whole album anymore. Likewise, in education, we have the technology and even the policy models to allow students to craft something that is uniquely theirs, from every class that they take to every extracurricular activity that they're involved in. And there are examples from Arizona, from Florida, from Utah, where students can go and find the classes that meet their needs specifically. So we need to look for ways to make sure that students, like the superintendent was saying, can maximize their opportunities. And we have the technology today that will allow them to do that.
Let's get back to teachers and incenting the best teachers. First of all, Andrew, define the best teacher. Define a good teacher, and how do you know when you got one?
Well, a good teacher is somebody that can walk into Chandler Mall on a Friday night surrounded by adolescents and not be afraid, Ted. That's how you know you're standing with a good teacher. That's how you know you're with a teacher, as a matter of fact, because all the other parents are dropping their kids off and driving away as fast as they can. I taught high school English for 17 years. I wanted my students to leave my classroom armed for battle, the battle of intellect, the battle for voice. In a world that had more and more frequency, more and more noise out there for voices, I wanted them to be skeptical, not cynical. That's my job. I wanted them to be able to tear apart an argument and find the places where they could get their own voice into the mix. I wanted them to leave my classroom better, and I told them that. The great teachers are the product of as much attention rhetorically, probably more attention rhetorically than they are right now in policy. We are headed in the wrong direction for the way we're supporting teachers. We have fantastic people coming back year after year after year. They came back the day after Sandy Hook. They come back the day the school starts. The doors open and the teachers are there. And they will tell you the same reason, time after time after time. I'm here because the kids are here. And that when you've taught a while, and many of you have, this is an incredible audience here, and many of you have spent a long time in classrooms, you just know that after a while, the orientation you have, the orientation that stays with you, it doesn't matter if you're Kathy Webke and you've been out for a while, but you were a classroom teacher and then a principal, somebody like me, you never leave that classroom orientation. You always have a part of you where the world just comes down to about 3 to 6 feet high. The policies are at 30,000 feet, 60,000 feet, but they impact the world at 3 to 6 feet high because that's the height of our students. And when you're a teacher, that's what you care most about.
Jaime, getting the best teachers, keeping the best teachers, finding them, defining them, please.
Well, first off, I think you have to have a mindset that believes in our state that regardless where a kid lives, they're going to have access to a quality education. That has to be the fundamental premise from which we start. And if that's the case, if that's our mindset, then you're not going to have a situation where some people will say, and I've heard this too many times, and I know some of you have heard this too many times, yeah, but you can't expect those kids to do as well. Well, those kids, who are those kids? Your kids? Oh, no. My kids are at the Harvard of the West, ASU. My kids. You can tell where I went to school. No, my kids are going to do this, my kids are going to do that. Well, of course, that should be the mindset. And if that's the mindset, then our structures need to be developed that attract and incentivize and make it so that teachers want to get into the prevention, so that it is exciting for them, that they know that if they perform well, if there's an ability to excel, that they're going to be rewarded and they're going to be acknowledged. But I think, unfortunately, right now, we have a system that doesn't do that. We have a system that says everybody is everybody. And we just need to get away from that. And if we're serious about all kids having access to a quality education, then that really should be the driving force on how these kinds of structures should be set up.
Dana, you want to comment?
Yeah, I think if we took a step back and did a media scan of the last 5 years of both mainstream media and social media, we would not see us praising and elevating teachers. We have denigrated them, we have criticized them, we have said they are not up to par, they are not up to task. That is not how you bring in good people to be good teachers. So we've got to really start supporting, preparing, training, professional development to be the best, not starting with the assumption that they're the worst.
Supporting, training, lifting. Secretary Huppenthal, how do we do that?
Well, I think it's first to identify the characteristics of great school districts. And what we've seen among our higher performing school districts is sometimes decades worth of internal culture building. When we go to school districts like Chandler School District, and Camille Castillo's been in that school district for 42 years, and she's building upon the work of a superintendent who was in there for over a decade, and he was building on that work of a superintendent who was over there for a decade. We don't see great school districts happening overnight. It takes that great culture building that happens over a prolonged period of time, and we also see those superintendents like Calvin Baker down in the Vail School District, perhaps one of the top, if not the best school district in the state. He's really got this supreme what works focus, digging through the very best in the literature and the research to guide every single decision that he makes, carefully weeding out bad research from not, the excellent research from the second-rate research. So we see a focus on research, proven practices, and that weeding out process, and we see this continuity. We see cohesive school boards. When we go to the other end of the spectrum, we see superintendents turning over every 2 years. They don't have the continuity to grow themselves and learn through some mistakes that they might make over time. They're cast aside easily. We see that problem with one of our most important school districts in the state, Tucson Unified School District. Elizabeth Fagan was there for 2 years. She's now up in Colorado. She's a national model. People fly to see her school district in Colorado. She only lasted 2 years. John Petticone, 2 years is all he lasted. They have another candidate now there, a superintendent who has a chance to be excellent. Are they going to? So it's these. We see this continuity and culture building as critical because teachers flock to that kind of environment. They want to be in it for the higher purpose, and they can't get that if it's constantly being fragmented and broken up.
Andrew.
When we talk about teacher excellence, I want to make sure that we put that at least at a strategic level here at the beginning. There are about 4 competencies that we want to work toward in our teachers. One of them absolutely is content mastery. Unfortunately, a lot of people's attention stops there, and we assume that if somebody has the content and they really care about kids, then eventually they will be a good teacher, and it's not that simple, but you have to have content mastery. The other is you've got to have pedagogical mastery, and that's simply the science of teaching. The first thing we have to do is accept that there is a science of teaching. It isn't just divine inspiration, and it's not just because we love kids and we really want to make a difference. There is a way to teach well. There are thousands of ways to teach well, but there is a replicable discipline involved in knowing your students and teaching them well. And it exists, and we've got to honor that as well. The third is we want to get to a field experience that shows that these people can actually be in a classroom, be what's called the teacher of record, and handle things. You can call that student teaching, you can call it a culminating event. I applaud ASU for daring to say that it's so important that it needs to be a year long in some of their programs. That was a great step. And the fourth one that we're learning more and more about that may just be the glue that holds the other ones together is cultural competency. The deep ability to understand students, understand the diversity that's in a classroom, and what motivates them, and what can start out maybe as an external factor, but then move inside that student and make that student want to succeed. So those 4 we have to get to, or everything else is basically driving on a bald tire.
Jonathan, comment on what you've heard, especially the idea of continuity and finding the best, retaining the best, but understanding also there are cultural questions at play as well. How do you see this?
Well, I think that great teachers, we can find them not always in the places where we're always looking. I think that there are great professionals who, as Andrew was saying, have the content mastery of the subject matter, but I also think that we need to make it easier for them to get in the classroom if they can show or demonstrate, like Andrew was saying, that they not only love kids but can be good at what they're doing. So I think that the traditional ways that we've relied on filtering college students into graduate schools of education and then straight to the classroom, we need to look for other ways. And I think that there are competent professionals that would do a great job in the classroom. We need to make sure that it is easy for them to get there.
Is it too difficult for them now?
I think that there are some barriers in place now, yes.
So how many of you had a really competent math professor who really knew content? And actually, we could put him through a teacher ed program in 2 weeks. How many of you thought that they were boring? You didn't learn one thing from them. All they did was throw a gauntlet down to get you out. So the idea that content mastery alone, I have many examples of professors who meet that, but there is no way they could teach a classroom. I love the idea that if you're an engineer, you can walk into a middle school and teach math.
You'll be there a day.
You will go out crying. They will make you cry. And so what we have to do is raise the idea of professionalism. And you know how we do that? We say, we're more rigorous. Our colleges of ed are more rigorous than law schools. You can't become a teacher, you can become a lawyer. That we say that you have to go through so much, so many experiences, know so much, that you can't do it in 6 weeks. Because I'll tell you, all of you have good kids, kids who are good. We all have good kids, right? In really excellent school districts, those teachers did not go through a 6-week program. They went through years of preparation. They went through weeding and sorting and parents holding their feet to the fire. Now, if it's good enough, and my kids went to a district like that, good enough for my kids, it's good enough for every kid's. Because what happens is underprepared teachers actually migrate toward districts that need over-prepared teachers. And so this is actually treating people differently, including children, by providing the best professional all of us, again, a systematic approach, can provide.
Jonathan?
Just quickly, I don't think it denigrates the profession to suggest that teachers can come from places that we don't expect. And the evidence would be in the excellent private schools that we have around the state, the charter schools that don't necessarily have to have every teacher certified, or the great homeschool communities that we have. So I've met dozens of moms and families that have excellent students that are in classrooms that are not just the traditional public schools, right? They're in either home schools or they're in private schools. So, we can have, I don't think it says anything bad about the profession to suggest that there can be high quality professionals that can come from many areas that can do a great job in the classroom.
Jaime, last point on this, if you would, regarding teachers, and I want to get to the quality of a graduate here in a second, but we've heard a variety of things from you don't know what you're getting into, to folks who may not know what they're getting into, could do a very, very good job. Middle point in there?
Well, I can say I couldn't become a teacher, and that's why I became a lobbyist. So, to your point. One of the things that I think we have to recognize, too, is some of the activities, day-to-day activities that teachers have to face every day, and it isn't teaching. I mean, they're asked to be social workers. They're asked to be all the things that are not part of the core mastery of their subject that they're trying to impart to the students. And that needs to be a shift, and that needs to be a focus that policymakers collectively have to be aggressive in saying, we can't be a mile wide and an inch deep anymore. If we're serious about kids being able to have the skill sets they need to go to our outstanding university or community college system or go into the workforce, that we're going to be aggressive in allowing our teachers to do what they do best, which is teach, and not have to worry about all these ancillary issues that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And I think we have to be guided by the research, too. And the research is really becoming clearer that content knowledge is a predictor for higher academic gains among students. And that, tragically, the traditional teacher education is not a predictor of higher academic gains. So I think what that tells us is that we have to do everything we can to allow math teachers to get into the classroom and teach, to allow history teachers, science majors, math majors, biology majors to get into the classroom and to give them the skills they need to manage the classroom, to know how you do pedagogy, those type of things. But we need to work intensively at making that through. And Arizona State has been a leader at doing exactly that. But I think we need to be even more aggressive. We've got to challenge our traditional colleges of education to look at that core research and keep working on it till their product is producing higher academic gains and has all that content knowledge that's a predictor.
Dana, please.
Well, Jaime's absolutely right about the demands we place on teachers to do social work and all kinds of other healthcare and nutrition work, and all of the research, all of it for 20 years, probably 50 years, is consistent that the most accurate predictor of educational success is socioeconomic status. So we need public policies that bring kids to school, not just at kindergarten, but every day, K through 12, healthy and ready to learn, so that teachers can focus on teaching. And that is not a side agenda. That is part of the core agenda for educational success.
All right, Ender.
All right, so look, we're at a crossroads now about teacher identification. America believes in the blogosphere and the rhetoric sphere that teachers are the most important, or certainly one of the most important control mechanisms for the quality of education that a student receives. You probably believe that. We know that the home is critically important also. But see, we're at a dichotomy about what we do with that information. Virtually every other country outperforming us says teachers are the most important. So we are going to front load the quality controls on who comes into the profession. The countries and systems outperforming us right now do not do what America is exploring right now. America says teachers are the most important variable in a student's education experience. So we're going to let just about as many people as want to come in and teach, and we're going to keep the entry bars low. And don't worry about it, because we will design systems to fire them faster, and that will be the balancing control mechanism. No other country outperforming us right now has taken that course of action. Whatever we decide about the competencies, do you all remember how mixed up you all were when you were teenagers? Developing adolescence? See, adulthood is a time. You're a teenager for 10 years. You spend the rest of your life forgetting how awful that 10-year experience actually was. This is why life is designed the way it is. And your income goes up, so you have more opportunities to forget. You cannot take the relational aspects out of being a classroom teacher. There will always be mixed up kids in classrooms that need to step aside from math or science or English and just have an absolute hormonal-induced ballistic fit about what life is doing to them and what's happening to them at the age of 13. And your classroom teachers will be the first responders to those situations, and they are directly tied to the attitudes those students develop that make them resilient and make them want to come back and learn the next day.
Okay, we need to shift a little bit here. Another question: can we agree as a state on the character and talent for a graduate of the 21st century? Show us that graduate, Jonathan. What does he, she look like?
Well, I think it's a graduate that is going to have to be prepared to deal with technological change. I think the reality is that the demands of the job market today deal with technology. They deal with computers, they deal with particular sets of expertise. And the fact is, there was a comment earlier about how the United States is 9th or 10th when it comes to international comparisons. Well, when you look at the percentage of our students that are actually proficient, we're 32nd in the world. So the fact is that while it is very true that getting quality teachers in the classroom is eminently important, and that they are going to be the ones to help students, I would be satisfied with the way that we were doing things if the facts weren't that 17-year-olds today have the same scores that they did in the 70s. So we have got to be prepared to prepare students differently than we did before. And we've got to make sure that the graduates that are coming out today, they have got to look different than the graduates of 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Mary, talk to us about that, because year after year we hear about these staggering numbers, and we're falling behind. We've been falling behind for decades, and yet we're the ones developing the PC. We're the ones developing. Are we just more creative? Are we just not nose to the grindstone? What's going on out there, and what do we need from a graduate from here on?
So I think the frustrating piece is that schools and education systems are slow to change. And indeed, most classrooms look now like they did when I went many, many, many years ago. And so there's persistent research that shows it's very difficult to make systematic change in the way you select teachers, the way you prepare teachers, the way you evaluate teachers, and what kids are experiencing in classrooms. So if you go to your child's classroom, it's almost like deja vu all over again, isn't it? I mean, it looks the same as when you went to school. It actually the teacher in some ways has the same role. I think the groundbreaking change will be through technology. I agree with you. I think it's a way to individualize for students. I think students will be able to develop their own way of doing things. Sybil Francis here, move on when ready. Kids will no longer be measured by seat time. They'll be measured by what they know, because we're able to collect that data now and give feedback to kids. So I think the revolution that's coming is through technology. At ASU in our teacher ed program, I think we're the only one in the country. We have a virtual game where our students get an avatar, and they always make fun of me because I say it wrong. Avatar, which gives you a sense of how technologically advanced I am. And our students practice being professional in a virtual world. And if they hurt anybody, it's actually virtual kids, thank goodness. And so we know that they have to practice something, and we have the tools and the brains that create that. So I think when we look at the future, you see it in your own kids. Do you know like 30% of all kindergartners have a cell phone? Like, really? I mean, why do 5-year-olds need a cell phone? But that does tell you the environment we're in. So we're fortunate that we're at a crossroad where I think we will be able to reach every child all the time. The walls of school will disappear. Before school, after school, during school will all look the same. And that people will have access and critical thinking to decipher what they need to learn more.
The idea.
Ted, we are trying to virtually unionize those avatars.
Well, yeah.
We have a virtual
Let
union.
us know how it goes.
The bargaining is a little rough, but we'll get it.
Jaime, the idea of all children having access to this technology obviously the wave of the future, does that not also suggest, though, I mean, we're having enough problem balancing out school districts, balancing out education facilities and resources now. What happens when everyone needs a PC, everyone needs an iPad or something along these? How do we handle that?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to recognize, too, is that technology is a tool. And too many times the technology is the be-all, end-all. They think that if we have the technology, then we're great. It's how you use the technology. And it comes back to why we need to have meaningful standards that are measurable, that we are able to say, if these children that graduate our K-12 system will have the skills necessary in mathematics, in reading, writing, and in the sciences, if they have those skills, then we know with a high degree of confidence they're going to be have a chance for success. I don't want to say be successful, but have an opportunity to succeed, whether they go into the workforce or higher education. The problem is right now, I can't tell you that. What I can tell you, and this is a study that I know figures from the State Board of Education Department and the Arizona Board of Regents, 60% of our kids that go into higher education, 60% need remedial work. That's absolutely unacceptable. So we cannot countenance failure in that regard. And what we have to do is think about it in terms of if we have assessments and standards that are meaningful, then how do we use these mechanisms to get kids there, and how do we develop an accountability system that helps to propel that?
That 60% remedial work is stunning to hear, and I think we're all assembled here to try to figure out how to change that. Dana, how do you change that?
Well, it's the three things that I said earlier. Match funding with expectations, prepare, support, and reward teachers, and make sure that kids come to school healthier and ready to learn. If we, with the powerhouse in this room, if we could focus on those three things together with some unity and design every policy, every public-private partnership, every funding decision to go toward those goals, we would move the needle, as Don said. We would move it substantially.
If we take a look at what's happened, we now have many thousands of schools that have gone to one-to-one computing across the nation. So we know what the verdict is on the existing technology, and the verdict is 0. That was the impact on average. But at the same time, I remain convinced, as Dean Kerner, that this is going to be the breakthrough. But it's going to be something different than the existing technology that's in place. So we're continually scanning software products and the results of those. And it's not just the results of the schools that have gone to one-to-one computing. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent doing random assignment, really strict, rigorous study on the software that's educational software that's in place. The impact, zero. So it's not this generation of technology, it's not this generation of software, it's going to be the next generation that breaks through. And this also melds into the idea of what a student needs to be ready for the 21st century. We are tremendously encouraged by the movement towards restoring what is called a classical education. The Chandler School District now has a special school for it. Gilbert does. The Great Hearts chain initiated this. We think the classical education is as powerful as it's ever been and is exactly what a student needs. What we see happening in the next decade is emergence of that classical education with the next generation of technology to break through at both ends, to allow those students who haven't engaged. And we see in the analysis of the existing software, students will go into that room with those computers for months, and 10% of them will have never done a math problem on this award-winning software. 10%, that was the finding of the research. It's going to be the next generation. And we have an idea what that next generation is going to look like, and we hope to be the first people to roll it out in Arizona.
Mary?
Ironically, if you want a better high school graduate, you have to have a better 3-year-old. And the continual dismissal of the importance of early childhood education, daycare, the absolute unwillingness to bring forward that things are different now. I stayed home for 10 years with my children. Those days are gone. That's what my son is doing. That's not what people can afford to do. We need excellent daycare. I think it's an issue about changing roles, quite frankly. Because how could we continually ignore that 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds actually, that a good environment for them, I see John over there, I know he agrees, that actually produces people who can read in 3rd grade. We don't have to fail them, folks, when they're 8 years old. We don't fail them in high school. But what this group together could actually, empower this state to say, we will focus on 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds because we want better high school graduates.
Andrew?
Well, what Dean Kerner is talking about is absolutely right. There are index points in the development of a child into adolescence where you cannot skip over important points of mastery. Mathematics at a certain point, and if anything, it's younger than it used to be. Early grade literacy, and you're right, it does begin far earlier than anybody probably wants to tackle. I keep thinking about the stats that don't change very much year in and year out, that in the private sector, an overwhelming number of CEOs of successful companies had broad liberal arts backgrounds in their undergraduate programs. So a CEO of an engineering firm might or might not have had deep engineering background, but they had a broad-based education. And I always think about that when I go back to the seniors I taught, where I'd ask them at the beginning of the year, how many of you are going to go to college? Now, it was, there were 3 levels, and this was a course very often where they didn't fancy themselves as college-bound. Beginning of the year, maybe 20% raised their hand. Well, I didn't tell them what I was doing. I took a curriculum that was just slightly distilled down from the AP course I was teaching at the junior year that was all about critical thinking and rhetoric and literary analysis and deconstructing arguments, and I just didn't bother to tell them that I was morphing that into the senior English curriculum. So they were basically getting a college prep program, but they didn't know it. And by the end of the year, when I would ask, how many of you are going to college, about 3/4 of them raised their hand. And I was always so intrigued by that. There is an evolution of higher level thinking skills that can bridge that gap, and I believe reduce the need for a lot of that remediation that Jaime mentioned. And I think that technology will allow us to better differentiate instruction in the future, but I think that teachers will always be a kind of cognitive coach, a combination of affective, relational skills, and the coach that takes somebody in an explosion of information and teaches them how to process, categorize, analyze, distill, synthesize that information. And I can tell you that those are the most exciting times in the classroom when an instructor is allowed to do that.
Jonathan, let's talk again about the idea of remediation and how does can the state afford to have technology so emphasized, as you mentioned in the start of the conversation, this particular question, knowing that there are districts that will have the equipment and the resources, and right now there are districts that simply do not? How do we fix that?
It's not just a matter of buying new material or buying new hardware. I think it's using often what we have in front of us better. And I'm glad that we opened the conversation talking about the importance of having good teachers in the classroom, because we cannot forget that the obvious next step is getting the students in front of the best teachers. And that's why the superintendent's comments about maximizing the opportunities that are out there are so important. So whether it's technology in the classroom or whether it's more iPads or what have you, we have to get the students in those classes, right? We have to give the students the opportunity to be in those high quality schools or even just high quality classes. And I would add that, these comments about the value of early education and getting to children young, well, that's very important, but let's not ignore that the only study of Head Start that's been conducted longitudinally found that there is no impact of students that have been to Head Start. It's gone by first grade and it's gone by third grade. So this idea that we should rely on federal funding to have students in younger grades going to Head Start, it's not there. The evidence isn't there. And the fact is that if we have high quality teachers and high quality schools and high quality classes, we have got to get kids in front of those high quality schools, in front of those high quality teachers.
Evidence isn't there?
Well, this is where we use some level of common sense. I mean, come on. The brain architecture and brain structure, which we have plenty of evidence of, is developed from 0 to 3 years old. 3 to 5 only indeed promotes the kind of brain we want. So what we do with that brain, who that brain sits in front of, who that brain is being cared for, the idea that that little brain, it doesn't matter who's talking to it, who's teaching it, what the environment is, what the learning activities are. We're all smart people here. I mean, the Head Start studies are some of the worst evaluations in education. However, even if that were true, would you put your little brain in front of nobody? In front of a TV? In front of a room with no books? I defy anyone here to say that their 0 to 3 or to 5-year-old is not surrounded by maybe irrelevant books, reading, writing, art, language.
What I think what both the dean and Jonathan both agree on is that great teachers make all the difference in the world in the education system. And so the other debate will go on till the end of time because it's not completely definitive yet. But in terms of getting students in front of the best teachers, we have to do a number of strategies. Number one, we need to get all of our school districts to measure teacher job satisfaction. Maybe you can't pay them more, but that's not really their number one driver. They want to be in a school where they're valued. And the last time we did our survey, 26% of teachers said their school was an excellent place to teach. We need that number up at 90 if we're going to maximize teacher quality in the classroom so they can grow over time. Nationwide, teachers grow for the first 3 years, and then essentially it's as flat as granite after that. We need a curve that continues to grow all the way into their 50s. We need to be measuring teacher job satisfaction, and we need to make that a part of our accountability system. When you're looking at the school, you need to see what is the teacher job satisfaction at this school. Did 90% of their teachers say it's an excellent place to work, or did 10%? We had one school district that came in at 0 on that survey. Not a single teacher said it was an excellent place to work. That's a part of the accountability. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is to recognize that we have some exciting research coming around that says that you can ask students questions that are significantly correlated with academic gain, and those questions of students can help guide a teacher to improve their craft. This has been a huge breakthrough that's been very recent. All the questions in the past, you asked the student whether they're happy or not. Now the Gates Foundation spent $100 million figuring out 36 key questions. We have a number of school districts, it's very exciting, the Mesa School District, that are now making this a standard to have teachers reflect, geez, 20% of my class said that I don't care about them as human beings. 20%. It's a shock to them to understand that they have a lot of students that year that didn't, and to evaluate themselves and how they're interacting with students. Because the data shows that if teachers care about students, they have greater academic growth, that they have more pulling power with that student. So there's these new kind of things happening.
Let's get Andrew to respond quickly, please.
Well, I joined the audience in being frustrated that the good feud that was starting over here was rudely curtailed and set on a constructive path. It turns out, though, that the kind of satisfaction surveys that the superintendent is talking about, we shouldn't be too quick to dismiss. A number of states have done some high-level surveying of the satisfaction level of both teachers and then building principals reporting on what they believed was the satisfaction level among their teachers. So not the principal's own satisfaction level, but what they viewed the teacher's satisfaction level in working conditions in 5 areas. And as the satisfaction rate among those teachers with those 5 areas, and compensation was not one of them, it had to do a lot more with instructional settings and resources and the time that teachers had to make instructional decisions. As that satisfaction level went up, so did the likelihood that students in those schools and districts were growing academically. There was a direct correlation, and it carries over from urban-based states to rural-based states. And in a society like Arizona that has gone too far down the road with an over-reliance on standardized test scores, and just about every bit of credible research is now backing that train up the track. Even Bill Gates came out and said, watch how much emphasis you put on standardized test scores. They are not going to deliver the returns we thought they would. It turns out that some of these more relational pieces they have to be really well crafted, and the psychometricians will be well paid. But you can get a really good read on the environment that's producing quality education, and I think that's what we all kind of sense to be the case. We want school systems, charters, traditional school districts, whatever, that run as a community concerned with education. They run well as a community. The parts come together and mesh well. The systems closest to students are well supported. So there's some metrics there that should be looked at.
All right, I want to get this question in because it's something that was mentioned in the opening statement by Don Budinger, and the idea of public-private collaborations here. Jaime, question from Table 5. What are successful examples of the private investments in the public-private partnership, the private investments?
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing with charter schools is that you are seeing a lot of private investments in the capital facilities that they're doing. I mean, they're not coming from, because charters by and large don't have access to public capital. They don't have the property-based structure that a lot of charters will have access to. They can go through IDA bonding, they can go through different kinds of mechanisms that they could utilize from the private sector. And I think those are some of the things we need to look at and replicate. I mean, because one of the things I think we get too focused on is that we try and fit everything into, okay, how much more money do we need from the legislature in order to fix things? As opposed to, how do we develop structures that, as Don mentioned, incentivize performance? And whether it is investments from the legislature, and don't get me wrong, I think it is absolutely needed, and I think we need to have a serious discussion about this. And anybody that might be in the room running for governor, I would encourage you to really think through how some of the things that we need to do in order to do that. But we also need to be aggressive on how do we look at the private sector and look at other mechanisms to incentivize that and not be so fearful of it. I think too many times we get into this bubble of saying, well, you can't bring in private sector because that's a public sector function. And that's just absolutely ridiculous.
Dana, what do you think about that?
I agree, and certainly Rodel has invested in public education. Helios Education Foundation is making investments that have a payoff, so there are great examples of public-private partnerships.
Mary, you got an example of the private emphasis on the public-private partnership?
Well, for us, our 2 other external resources are federal funding, which I think is very important to, our college has brought over $100 million to Arizona in order to improve teaching performance, actually, and also private philanthropy. Private philanthropy can be used as a lever to actually have a lot of influence, to move us in ways that are more thoughtful, So our partnership with Teach for America was actually prompted by a private philanthropist, and it's made us think more broadly about how important it is to engage everybody in the endeavor of preparing teachers.
Jonathan, some examples, and are the examples you are hearing, is that a good avenue for Arizona to take and to continue to take?
I think that's certainly a start. I would not forget that the students are really who we're talking about here. And what are the ways that students can be directly impacted by public-private partnerships, if you want to call them that, or just private sector investment? Certainly the tax credit scholarships that we have in Arizona, certainly the education savings accounts that we have in the state that would encourage new private schools to open, and not just any private schools, but private schools that are looking to meet the unique needs of children with, whether it's special needs, children that are from the foster care system or have been adopted, things like that. I think that those targeted and very precise investments meet the unique needs of children and of students in the system, and that's critical. That's what we've got to be doing.
But again, the concept of public-private, I mean, do you see that relation? Give us some examples of that relationship where it's not so focused on private, but you got a lot of the public in there as well.
Well, sure. Well, with the education savings accounts, obviously that is state funds that would have otherwise been set aside for a child that are put into what becomes a private bank account that parents can use to then buy a variety of educational services for their children. So, there's obviously overlap there. I would add, in states such as Utah and Louisiana, they have developed ways to allow parents to, again, use the money that was set aside for their child to find, classes from either public virtual schools or private virtual schools or universities or community colleges. So, I see those angles, right, where we are providing something either directly to students or directly to parents to make quality decisions for their students. That's the fastest way, right, to get to improving the outcomes for children.
Okay, we've got time for one last question, and I want each panelist to answer this question in about a minute or so. It's about a minute or so.
Gotcha.
So 5 minutes each.
Yeah. What does Arizona need to do and what does Arizona need to be recognized as a top education state? And then, quickly, how do we get there?
Well, the biggest challenge we have is we face an extraordinary demographic challenge, and a much larger percentage of our students come from low-income minority backgrounds. We have a majority minority school system now. The majority of our students now come from minority families. We need to be able to compare our academic results of our schools on an apples-to-apples basis with other school systems. I would love for Arizona to be taking the exact same test that Massachusetts takes, because we have not only the test score, but the academic gains. Schools have to take the students that come to them, but it's the academic gain that they control. And what we will show is that Arizona is going toe-to-toe with Massachusetts on the quality of its schools, the academic gains in the school system. That's what the very best research shows. So I would love for that to be an outcome. It's going to be a challenge. The only test that's available to right now is the PARCC test, but that would be sweet to be able to have that comparison. So that would be one thing, to be able to get an apples-to-apples comparison between Arizona schools and other states. I think the other thing is we need to fix the data system that is in the Department of Ed. I tell you, you have no clue. I had no clue coming into the department what a cancer that is on our school system. We have millions of transactions a day burdening our school districts with all kinds of issues. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees out there working full-time just trying to deal with the mess that comes out of that data system. We have to make it an imperative for the legislature to fix that. And it's not my data system. It's a data system for every charter school. It's a data system for every district school. It's a data system for every teacher. And it's a support mechanism for them, and it is doing a horrible job in that endeavor. We have to get that fixed.
Andrew, what does Arizona need to be recognized as a top education state?
One of the privileges I have in the role as AEA president is that I know a lot of you, and I know how much heart is out there in all kinds of positions that, unfortunately, the rank and file members of the AEA who are driving buses, teaching in front offices, in that world of 3 to 6 feet high, they will never know. And it's my job to convey as much of this as I possibly can to them, to let them know that they're not alone. But they won't know how much time and energy all of you put from your lives into thinking about education. And that's a shame, because a lot of you really do frame a major amount of your intellect and heart around these subjects. A good friend of mine that I've met in this role asked me recently what this state would look like if we made every decision, every major decision, around the number one priority of our children. What would that state look like? And I think what we need, Ted, is to be a state that doesn't wait for a Sandy Hook to talk about how important children are. Do you remember everything you said and felt the day after any of those events? You know, how the whole country takes a breath back and people pontificate and they stand on a stack of soapboxes and talk about how important children are. And then the calendar just goes by and it all settles into the din and we just wait, and that's a tragedy. We probably need to front-load teacher quality and preparation in the way that some very fine institutions have. I'm a wildcat. I can't mention ASU more than 5 times in one sitting, and I'm very close. We need to front-load teacher quality, and we need to be tough on ourselves about that. We need to respect teachers as much as we do when they gather together and express a collective voice as a profession, because they have the experience and expertise that not many people do, because they are in our classrooms, and some of us have been. Even I haven't been for years. And we need to make sure that when we talk about how important teachers are, we actually mean that when they're in a group calling for things and crying out for what they need. Or do we want them individual, silent, obedient, and behind a classroom door? Because that's not how you honor a profession. We've got to front load the early childhood education and the early well-being of our children.
Has anyone noticed our first 2 responses went just a tad longer than a minute?
This is my education leader,
Yes.
and I followed his example.
The bell's going to ring, and we're going to be halfway done here. Mary, take as much time.
Quickly.
What do we need?
Okay, I'm from Massachusetts. I lived in Massachusetts for 7 years, and I will tell you the strength we can build on here in Arizona that we never had in Massachusetts. I, in my position, would never have met the equivalent of John Huppenthal. John and I worked together. I never would be on a panel like this. There would never be a group of people who are movers and shakers in one room, talking to each other, agreeing and disagreeing. Goldwater Institute has been good to me, so I'm not going to, burn that bridge. However, and so we can build on that strength. And what we don't have here, and what I think Rodel is trying to do, and my friend Jackie, is to build on the strength of what we have. We all talk to each other here. We all know each other here. We all have the same goals. Massachusetts never had that. And so I think we need to leave here with 1 goal, 2 goals, and relentlessly work on that for education. All of us in our own way, with our own perspective.
Give us one of the goals. You can't just leave us hanging like that. You got 2 goals.
I have 2?
Yeah, you said 1 or you just pick 1 or 2, or what do you think?
I think that and is actually the most important. Of course, I'm going to fall back. I think this will lead to, as someone said, it's a tool to getting to what we want. And what we want is successful kids. So it has to include really moving to the legislature and getting financial support.
Okay. What do we need, Dana?
We need to stay focused. I have not seen a kindergarten report card lately. My kids are out of the house now, 18 and over. But if you think back to what your kindergarten report card looked like, do you remember it had all those categories like follow directions, stay quiet, stay focused, and complete a task? Well, we are not doing too well on staying focused and completing a task. We're really falls far below in that category. I know they didn't use that measure then. But we've started and stopped a lot of great things. So professional development system for teachers called Career Ladder, phasing out. We had a reading program back in the 90s that Jaime worked on, gone. We had flexible funding for school districts to focus on the early grades, gone. We had state funding for full-day kindergarten, gone. So we need to focus, and with all due respect to the politicians in the room, you guys get distracted pretty easily. So the rest of us need to keep you focused, and we need to be together and stick with a goal and a process through the ups and downs and the elections and the recessions and the surges. We need to stick to it together.
Jaime, a top education state. What do we need?
Well, first and foremost, we need to incentivize performance. And when you incentivize performance, it means that if a school is outstanding, then we are going to try and replicate that school. We're going to want to expand that school. We're going to franchise that school and take that model and do everything we can so that children that don't have access, kids that are in mediocre schools, kids that are in failing schools, that we've, collectively as a state, we're going to say we're not going to countenance that anymore. If we have that mindset, just think about that for a second, that we will not tolerate a child being in even a mediocre school, that we're going to develop structures around that. We're going to incentivize that. We're going to reward teachers around that. We're going to empower parents around that, which is something that hasn't been talked about today, which is empowering parents. And quite frankly, if I had a bill that we could push in the legislature that we could pass tomorrow that could really change things, that's getting parents more involved in their kids' education, first and foremost. Because if we do those things, but we have to have that mindset that goes back to my original premise, is that we have to have a mindset that says regardless of where a kid lives, where he grew up, like me in Nogales, or if he grew up in Scottsdale, they're gonna have access to a quality education. And if that's what we truly believe, then all of these things that we're talking about here are absolutely doable.
Jonathan, what do we need to be? Just everyone out in the country, Arizona? Oh yeah, that's a good education state.
We need to be defined as a state that pursues high-quality results, challenge students in the classroom, give parents the opportunity to make good decisions for them, and then challenge parents to do so, challenge teachers in the classrooms to challenge their students. Those are the outputs that we need. In terms of the inputs, we need flexibility. If there's anything that we know about the future and the job market, it's that we can't predict it. Many of the jobs that we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years, we don't even know what they are today. They're going to be different than we even anticipate. And so students need the flexibility to find the classes that uniquely meet their needs. Parents need the access to those classes and to make good decisions for their children, whether they're 0 to 3 or 0 to 5 or elementary school or high school. Parents need the ability to make those choices, and they need to be put in the driver's seat in their child's lives.
We want to ask Don Budinger to come up here for some closing statements, but before we do, let's give our panel a great round of applause. And let's hope that we got some good ideas here and some ways to move forward. Don.
My heavens, we learned something from very smart people. Thank you all for the contribution you made today to our learning. We really appreciate everything you brought to the table today. And also want to thank
To the Rodel Foundation, this was excellent.
John, thank you. So a couple thoughts. First, thanks to all of you for coming, especially thanks to the table leaders who helped shape the questions that made this a very different experience. And a couple thoughts as we leave, if I could. As we look to what our task is, as we look to some definition of who we are, it's time to recreate the Arizona brand. What we could be is the country's leading fiduciary citizenry. That we care, that we learn, that we work together in uncommon harmony, and we take it to a level that nobody else has. It's possible. When I think back in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it makes the claim we're all created equal. When that claim was made in 1776, what they meant was everybody was in the same game with the same opportunity, with the same starting place. Very different than the deal they all came from Europe. But what does it mean now? I think it means now that we treat each other with respect, with care, with dignity, and that when we disagree, we do it with civil discourse. The day of the my way or the highway needs to be finished. And we can do that. It's easy in a way because very few people are doing that. Most people are playing the my way or the highway game. The second thing in our Constitution, the first three words, we the people, when that was first stated, it was deciding and defining who was making the claim that we chose to be free and independent. 233 or 4 years later, I think it means that we, the people, are responsible Not the people that we elect just when we elect them, but we're responsible all the time. So the way that would play out, in our view, would be this, that as each of us leaves today, we button down and focus down on what we do in the space that we are committed to, and we own the whole space. Everybody's job, the whole system. That's the thing that's tough, to honestly care in your heart for every kid. We have 1,100,000 kids in our K-12 system. We will arrive, we will succeed as a people. We will lead the country when it's evident that the way we behave, the way we act, the way we invest, the way we perform in a fiduciary capacity is we care for every kid. And I know you all do. Let's make it happen. Thank you. Great job, all of you. Thank you. John, I appreciate it very much.